there was a New York Times article that was written late last month about Black men in college. So the article found that only 19% of students at Howard University are Black, whose enrollment levels at four-year colleges have plummeted across the board, including PWIs. Black men represent currently 26% of HBCU students, down from 38% in 1976. There are about as many non-Black students attending HBCUs as Black men. It's a crazy stat that the article uncovered. Some of the causes that they talked about in the article were higher college costs, financial needs of Black families, higher suspension rates in high school in particular, especially among Black men, and negative messages about potential academic success and potential for Black men. One thing that is worth noting is that while all of this is happening, the Trump administration recently cut 600 million in teacher training grants that were designed to place teachers in underserved schools and diversify the educational workforce. So I feel like this has been one of those topics where everyone has kind of had their say and their thought on it, which I think some have been productive. I think most have actually been very unproductive personally. We kind of had our own debate about it, but who wants to kick off the conversation? I think we can focus on, what can we do to grow the rates, and what do you think the biggest problems are in terms of why they're there now?
I want to
Um,
hear from the men first.
well, I was about to go before
Oh,
you butted in.
Go ahead,
Uh,
Endo.
I'm glad you kicked the conversation off of like, what can we do? Because I
Hmm.
think the conversation should be focused,
Yeah.
considering like we all can kind of talk about the barriers.
Hmm.
However, it's on us as Black men to kind of like fill the gaps, whether that's mentoring, teaching more, and being present in the household. I do kind of hate the mentality of like, well, like, where's that daddy? But like, other people can have influence on a young
Hmm.
man's journey. We were kind of to some degree talking about this in the barbershop. In the barbershop, like maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, but they were talking about basically Anthony, the guy who's having all those kids,
Hmm. Hmm.
and like his journey. And I'm not sure if he went to college or not, but
1 year.
right. So like he's got all this money, he's this big superstar. One would assume he would be taking more financial like better steps financially in terms of like how he's having babies and just being like a better figure, but he is young. So like give him the benefit of the doubt to some degree. However, it is like if you want to just identify a person like that versus like a person who is, just coming from a regular family who doesn't really have like many opportunities, do they take college? I don't want to say for granted, but like, do they value it the same as
Hmm.
some people? Because we don't know what their circumstances is, but I know, like, I mean, you needed money in college, you need money in life, and that's probably like their first mindset is how can I get to the money? And I do think between like, pipeline in prison and then having that mindset just in general as a Black man, those two things kind of conflate. And I also think the not having like strong male figures, like even in the media plays a big part in this also
Hmm.
because they don't project successful Black men. I tell Noah this all the time, but that like Robert Johnson, um,
Yeah, yeah, I knew
man,
exactly where you're going.
I didn't know who he was. See, Mackenzie faces like, who is that? That dude.
no, I'm like, what are you about to say?
I didn't know who he was until he paid off those that tuition at Morehouse.
Mm-hmm.
That what it was that 2019.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for men like that to not be in, I don't want, yeah, in prominent access to some degree, to where I can see myself in that spot. Like Noah has even said, I think on the podcast, he didn't want to get into politics until he seen somebody like Barack Obama.
Hmm.
So until you can sometimes see yourself in a space, it is hard to navigate to that space. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've been thinking about a lot is I think of course I think focusing it like we always do on this podcast, try to focus it at least inward to some degree. because I think the thing that I was referencing earlier, I think the thing that I don't like is that I think everyone is kind of projecting it outward by just describing the problem without necessarily figuring out like how do we actually like change it. And at least like for someone like me, like granted, like none of us have children. But I think especially like for you and me, Henry, like we've talked about this a lot of at least how can, and I've even had to like challenge myself and like I'm frankly part of the problem. And I think it's also like being able to understand that like, hey, the things in which we're all currently doing, which are all choices of economics, is not good enough. Or I can't then complain and say like, hey, these rates are good enough without actually questioning like, hey, what am I doing as someone who has that degree? Who was fortunate enough to do that. Like, granted, my friends and I have a small scholarship to help with someone at Howard, but like, there need like I need to do more, and I think that's like clearly the thing that we just need to like figure out is like how can we do more from like both a money perspective because that's the biggest barrier with a lot is it giving more money, but also in addition to the money that I can give, what time can I give someone locally? And like that's something that I just have not done. So I am part of the problem. That's not to say like if every single black man who had a little bit of money, who had a degree, if they all got involved, that might change stuff on the margins, but we won't know until we all try. And I think I've kind of challenged myself, I think, in this, or just said like, hey, like I can't identify this problem without with removing myself or not thinking that I am complicit in it happening as someone of economic and educational privilege. I just can't do that, or I think that would be disingenuous. Um, so I think there are a lot of reasons why. I think Henry hit it on the nose perfectly. I think it's also those people who do have those degrees, because like Henry knows, like there are bros in the barbershop who do have those degrees, but we don't really talk about like, hey, actually, I have a business, or hey, nah, like y'all need to go to school. It's usually we talk about sports or we talk about music or just like what's kind of popping culturally. But I think it's more incumbent upon, as you were talking about, Henry, like those dudes who have that degree to be like, yo, what y'all like, what's college looking like for y'all? Even like having those conversations, it might not be a big shift, but it's at least making it acceptable to have those conversations in this space. And I think
No,
even that makes it more real because we don't talk about that. Like we really don't talk about that.
I didn't mean to cut you off,
No,
but
go,
like
yeah, yeah.
you said, like the having that conversations here and like creating a space for black men to have this
Hmm.
conversation literally in the barbershop, like the Anthony conversation kind of transitioned to like black figures in the
Hmm.
in access, then it transitioned to like finance and managing finance because it was two people in there that like work in finance, and one of them, he was younger than I was. He was 28. He graduated from Morehouse. He managed like wealth accounts. Basically, he planned wealth. He doesn't deal with anybody less than like $10 million. So, point in case of explaining all that is like just knowing that access right there for a little dude that's coming in the barbershop and just casually listening to this conversation, and now like triggers his mind to some
Hmm.
degree. It's also, literally, my barber white hair's cut my hair is like, dang, bro, it's so crazy, like how when I was growing up, we didn't have these type of conversations in the barbershop. We were always talking about sports and women and the
Yeah.
more
Hmm.
thing
Well,
Yeah.
I'm
It
gonna
just wasn't. It just wasn't a conversation. Yeah. Go ahead, Kesley.
Yeah, okay,
Ground
so
us.
I'm gonna jump in. I feel like I agree with everything y'all are saying, but so I'm gonna add this new point. That's something that I've personally been seeing, even when I spoke at career days. I feel like there's just a shift happening from like what you all were saying, kids want to get money, or
Hmm.
in general, kids want to get money and kind of get it quick without going through the work and stuff. And something that I found, I feel like more and more kids are trying to become creators and they're
Hmm.
seeing this creator economy, and in their head it's a way to get quick money. But so I don't really know how to wrestle with that. When I spoke with at the career day, when I said I went to college, oh, you could tell the ears turned off immediately. Now, while that I do feel like was a socioeconomic thing, like I'm
Yeah.
not going to think of college because I know that I can't afford it,
Hmm.
but the fact that I would rather shoot videos on YouTube than go to school and get a degree. I think that that's something that we're seeing, along with there's been a shift in a lot of more kids doing, what are those degrees? Like becoming plumbers,
Yeah.
those type of
Trade.
degrees,
Trade.
trade degrees. So I think that that's good. But I think overall, other than everything that you all said, because I do feel like at the end of the day, your mom, a woman telling a boy to do something, I feel like always comes better from somebody who looks like them, a
Hmm.
man.
Yeah.
Um, But on top of that, I think like other than the traditional basketball trajectory of becoming a rapper, I think now I'm seeing so many more kids are following the Kai Cenats or following the Drewskis and are just seeing the content that they can create. But I want to like encourage them that each of those people have managers that are actually managing their money who went to school. And that's
And
like the thing I really like the people that you're, even when we talk about Anthony Edwards, the people around Anthony Edwards that are managing his money probably have degrees.
yeah, there's a classic Charles Barkley quote where he says, "I don't have a degree, but everybody who works for me does." Yeah, and it's like a
Yeah.
classic. It's like it's a very
But
funny,
see,
honest
even
quote.
that makes it like then you take the kid with that mentality, well, I don't want to be the employee, I want to be the boss. And then it's like that thought that I can't work
Yeah,
for
and
someone, I
Who's-
want to be
who
my own.
introduces that idea to them though? That's what I'll say because like we only know the Anthony Edwards or the rapper or the Kai Cenat or the Drewski because they're mainstream and the media pushes them. We don't know the business manager or the finance guy or the
I don't think, not to cut you off, but we cannot keep blaming the media for this. Like social media is its own
I think
thing. There's
it's a
plenty
factor.
when
It's a
we talk
factor.
about it's a
Kenzie, I'm
fact. Now,
sorry.
hold on, let me
It's a
finish.
factor, but it's not the
When
only. To your
you're
point,
talking,
I
let
agree.
me finish. When we're
No, I agree
talking
with you.
about the TikTokers or like social media, and I open my phone, I have access to so many more faces than just who's on the news. So when we had the educational department and that stuff happening earlier this year, there was plenty of creators who took and did the Hillman TikTok and were giving educational advice. So if you wanted to seek it out, you could. I think that like yes, the media plays a role. You can't stop boys from watching basketball and football, but I think that the in my opinion, we can't just keep blaming the media. Those are the mentors. Those are the people on the ground that have to change something. Like, yeah, we could blame the newscast, but newscasters highlight small business owners on a Sunday night. Maybe that's not the highlight or whatever.
But
The
also that
media,
audience doesn't watch the news. So like
yeah.
they could highlight it, but it's like the eyes
Mhm.
who need to see it are not
And then
watching.
there's
So
the
like
other
yeah,
thing of like on social media in general, like negativity is more entertaining than what's real. Like watching Anthony Edwards play basketball is probably more entertaining than talking about going to college and turning in a test and doing all of these things. So it's like I think the best thing that we can do is everything that y'all said is mentorship. And but it's something that I think has to start at the beginning, like mentoring the babies. Like college should just be a no-brainer when you get to
and the
that
funny
point.
thing is that one thing I do want to add that I actually think is important is that I also think this is where like the actual element of actual schooling comes into this because I do think that we often like detach like, oh well, it's got to happen in like these cultural settings. It's like, no, well actually this child's gonna spend most of their time like actually in school at a certain point. And I do even think it's like we have to, encourage, and this is where like the local politics comes down, and this is like part of the reason why Henry, you and I have been talking about this forever, and like paying attention to like who's on your school board, who's on these other things. Like, hey, can you talk to your school board about having like a 2 week videographer camp, or like actually figuring out ways to actually make school engaging? That's not to say that you need to like scrap the necessary curriculum, but you have to adjust to what is happening now, I feel like. And understanding that, like, hey, if more people want to be creators and more people want to be musicians, hey, here's audio production. Here's these other interesting skills that are actually tied to the thing that you're really interested in. That you might not be the person making the beat, but it needs to be mixed and edited by somebody that takes that might not even take a degree, but that is also setting you up to where you have a career. Or hey, you might be interested in content creation. Hey, here's actually how you edit a video. Here's actually how you take a still shot. Here's how you take different shots in the light. Or here's how you actually adjust your background to make sure, like, even like stuff like that to just make sure, like, hey, the things that you're actually interested in, there are levels to this. And education is going to be the thing to have you do levels to this. But even then, I think that the thing that I don't think that people have talked enough about is that, like, granted, my mother's a teacher. So, like, teaching actually needs to be like a profession that one that Black people in general can be in and live a healthy life in terms of economically, but like that's a big barrier to actually not having Black men in the classroom. Black women too, is that we need to just simply pay teachers more. And
Did
that
I
if we
ever have a
actually, no, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm like trying to think, did I ever have a black male teacher? And I really
I've
feel
had
like
maybe like
no.
five, maybe five, and I went to private
I've
school,
had
so
a
they were able to
few
pay more,
those people. I've
No.
had a few.
but they were
And
all
when I had a
transformative for me.
few, when I've had a few, I'll say less than five. And one especially play a very big
Hmm.
role in my
Same.
life in terms of just like skill setting, figuring out college, so on and so forth. So like to Noah's point, I definitely think it is in the education system. And I mean, Black men aren't valued in the classroom. I can come up with so many examples to where like my teachers not bullied, but they would pick on Black men specifically to make them like a little uncomfortable or shy or not as smart. And I'm not saying that was the intention, but
I
you
mean,
get
it's bias. It's bias. I mean, that's it is. It's bias that you don't even know. And I think that like the prison to, I don't really like the term like, school to prison pipeline, but it's just, there's so much data in terms of
it's a real thing. It's
no,
a
no,
real
it is. It is. I think the phrase very much so oversimplifies. I think the way it takes place in discipline, but also like educational expectations. In that it's not only like, hey, are we more likely to go to detention, but we're more likely to teachers are more likely to recommend black children in general, and more so black men, to get tested to be held back, even if they don't need to, and how even that decision to hold a child back if they don't need to can also play a role into education, their own concept of what this is. Like you have a child who's in school. Imagine how that feels for a young 6-year-old black child. Hey, I'm always getting suspended, not necessarily for even anything that I'm doing, or now I'm being held back, so I'm not with my peers. And like even like understanding the emotional toll that that can then take to where school does not feel like a home for them. And I think we also need to like understand what that means. And I think to your point, Henry, like I had a black male homeroom teacher, and he went to Morehouse, and granted, I was messing up in high school. I was not a good student, but he was the one to say like, no, like you actually can do this, and like, hey, like you're going to mess up. That's okay. Here is like the long term trajectory, but I wouldn't have known that if a white woman was not going to tell me that. A white man was not going to tell me that. A black woman could have told me that. It might have landed differently because I think he understood, hey, I understand the things that you're thinking through or going through or how you feel like, hey, school is hard. It's okay. Even that aspect of like understanding to like where, to your point, Henry, like even if there's a student, a black male student who's not doing well, like, hey, that's okay to not, like, you're allowed to make mistakes. And I think even having that aspect, that also gets into like the social side of it. And that I think too often black children in general, and this is not even male or women, a lot of them don't feel like they have the room for error. And I think even like educationally telling them like, hey, it's okay to mess up. It's okay to not have everything together. It's okay to get a C on this. Like that's not the end of the world. I think even like that aspect of understanding that I think is really key and often lost in this of like we just need more people giving these kids guidance about not only school but just life because I think that really frames their expectation. I don't know, yeah, Mackenzie.
No, I was just gonna say, so then I think that that pressure comes from that twice as good for half as much.
Hmm.
Because I
Yeah,
feel like, how do we teach our kids that then? Like, we have to teach them both. But like, I don't even think like as a black person, you can escape that because unless you're in a black school, like elementary school or black thing, like if you're in a space like a little kid in an elementary school and a white teacher, it's kind of, I feel like it's already there, you
and the
know?
funny thing is it's that really thin line to where I
Mhm.
think it does put a lot of pressure, and I think all of us feel that in our we're all damn near 30 and we still feel that, but we're also still feeling the effects of that too. But also we have to understand probably is that like, hey, there are some people who are going to fall off of that pressure, and that's through no fault of their own. But then how are we helping them? And I think that's like the key, and I think that's the thing that's kind of been lost, and even the article didn't really hit at this as much as I wanted it to, of like, hey, what's it actually like for these current kids who have dealt with COVID, who have dealt with all these other things. I think there's even more of a cliff that's going to happen that we haven't even seen yet of like what happens to those black children and specifically those black boys who weren't in the classroom for 2 years. That's what I think we need to start talking about now. And probably, Henry, that probably gives us people like you and I even more of incentive to say like, hey, we just have to get involved in any way, whatever way that is, even if it's something small of like money or time. And that's probably what I would encourage other people who are like us upset about this number. It's like we all just have to like figure out something, even if that's something small. Go into a high school and say, hey, is there an after school program I can help out at? Um, I don't have all the answers, but maybe that's a start. And I think probably us starting is better than nothing, right? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, like speaking of time, my pledge is to like try to find some after school program to get involved with, because that article did spike like a passion in me